Hey, Keith here with Rebel Civics. Today we're going to talk about unconstitutional actions of the federal government. This recent reports and squashing of the idea of banning gas stoves nationwide is a ludicrous example of what federal government will go to, what they actually do seriously talk about, as if it's constitutional to ban gas stoves. Ludicrous is the first word that comes to mind for that. I picked out a few others to talk about. The bump stop ban is a fun one. And then we're going to get into the whole list of three-letter federal agencies. Just run through the list and say which ones are constitutional and which ones aren't. Spoiler alert, or maybe trigger alert, depending on your point of view. Pretty much all of them are illegal for being unconstitutional, violating the highest law of the land. So today we got a guest to bring in to back me up on this and say his own, point out his own unconstitutional actions. We got Benjamin Schaefer. He's a attorney deeply interested in the Constitution. He's also legal counsel for the alternative currency system Goldback. So Benjamin, welcome to Rebel Civics.
Hey, great to be back.
Yeah. So today's going to be a fun one, I think. And when I said spoiler alert, I'm totally serious. That's for the people who don't know. And it's also a trigger alert, I think, for the people who don't agree. Anyway,
it's a bit shocking. It's shocking no matter what your opinion is on it when you realize exactly how this works. What is the government, and why is so much of it not mentioned in the Constitution? For example, my first question for the listeners would be, can you name the four branches of government? And people will say, what do you mean the four branches of government? Well, the largest of the four branches of government isn't normally included in the answer to what are the three branches of government. The largest branch of government is the administrative state.
So you call it the agency, the executive branch agencies that are supposed to be run by the executive branch, but
right, but are run by the executive branch? Exactly what does that mean? For example, can the president always do whatever he wants with them? Well, sometimes more than we think he should be able to, but sometimes less. So it's rather strange. They're not just people who work for the president.
That's the part of the national view of things is, if the president says it, then you have to do it. That's the idea.
Right.
the flag wavers.
Well, right, because there's a certain point where a lot of Americans seem to have forgotten we fought a war about not having a king, right? But a lot of people want the president to be the king.
They wanted to elect a king, right? George Washington honorably said, no, I don't want to be your king.
Yeah.
He could have been if he wanted. That's if you put any of the recent presidents, certainly any in the last century or so, century two maybe, if you gave them that choice, they would say,
sure.
Yeah. Like, or they might say, well, I got a pen and a phone. Like, I don't care about the title. I am the king.
Oh, boy.
That might be the answer. But a lot of people have the view that you just have to do what the president says. I don't think that the current president could list the agencies that he's supposedly in charge from. So
I think very, very few people, unless they're specialists in administrative law, even specialists in administrative law, they usually only know one type of administrative law. I don't think there's very many people on this earth, unless they're trivia nuts, who could possibly name all of the administrative agencies, let alone who all the heads of them are, or let alone what they all do.
Yeah. So if you're CEO of a corporation that has a bunch of subsidiaries, you should be able to at least list the subsidiaries off the top of your head, right?
Yeah, but this makes the U.S. federal government really is about the largest corporation with more subsidiaries than any other in the world.
And people go on. So, okay, I'm going to put up the first one this one I think it made a lot of people laugh, but they apparently were seriously talking about this. This is the gas stove ban that's been in the news. It was reported, all over the place. The administration weighs a nationwide ban. I'm not sure exactly how much it was really weighing it, but it was based on the Consumer Product Safety Commission mulling over the studies of emissions. And a lot of noise came out. Anyway, they talked about bans. So the guy, Trumka Jr., Richard Trumka, he's the commissioner. He said any option is on the table. Products that can't be made safe can be banned. So what do you think he means by, he's saying they can do it. They didn't actually do it, and there's various reports. I have another one up here. This is kind of a fact check one. So, oops, that's the wrong button. There we go. ABC, and this is actually from an AP report. They say they are not banning gas stoves. They say Biden doesn't support this. Well, I don't know. Any options?
Well, maybe he doesn't support it, but I think the bigger question, of course, is then why do we care what Biden's opinion is on gas stoves? Does he have the power to do anything about gas stoves? Where in the Constitution does it say, and the president shall make decisions about gas stoves?
I flipped through it. I couldn't find anything about stoves.
Right? Yeah.
And it wasn't because
stove appears. I've read the entire Constitution many times. Never noticed the word stoves anywhere in there.
No, wood stoves. They Thomas Jefferson would have thought it ludicrous for the federal government to ban wood stoves because it might hurt children if you don't have good enough ventilation. That's what the claim is.
Can and does. I mean, don't get me wrong. We want to have safe. We want to have safe stoves. Sure, of course we do. We don't want people making bad stoves. But what does that have to do with the federal government?
Yes, and
is the hard question.
The whole conversations here, like I'll show this one again. This was a Republican, Texas conservative Republican. Come and take it, basically. Pretty funny. I'll never give up my gas stove, the maniacs in White House. It did cause a lot of people to say we're not going to do it. The response to this, but officials insist that people's kitchen appliances are in no danger. But then they go through and they talk about the risk and how products that can't be made safe can be banned. So stoves emit dangerous levels of toxic chemicals, which is actually true. Stoves, when you heat things, chemicals come out, including from propane and natural gas stoves. But that's why you have ventilation. So, I mean, it's a simple thing. Like, we're not denying that you should have ventilation. You go in a commercial kitchen, they have a huge hood over the gas stove. Right?
Sure.
Like, you have to do that if you're running, a whole wall of gas stoves, and it's a ventilation question. But the real question is this CPSC. Like, this just points out, like, well, we got to fire all those guys and shut that down. There's no authority to do that.
I think it's interesting that Trumka's argument, though, is that regulations apply to new products, not necessarily to old products. But that's a little disingenuous because we know that they can ban or change at least old products too, if they're deemed to be dangerous, right? So, if somebody, let's say for example, gas stove makers don't have carte blanche to create gas stoves that are accidentally filled with C4. So the first time you light it up, it will explode. Okay. They can't do that. The Consumer Product Safety Commission would be like, no, it turns out you cannot stuff your gas stoves with explosives so that they will blow up. Okay. And you'd say, oh, but I thought you said that it only applies to new products. Yeah, that's not exactly true. Old products, if they are deemed dangerous, I'm sure they're going to try to regulate them.
The way they responded, and even in this article, that's a fact check. The fact check is really that, well, it says the president does not support banning gas stoves. This Jean Pierre lady said, like, okay, after all this backlash, they got to say that. Now, whether he really said that or not, who knows? But anyway, there was so much kickback. But it's all, I read a few articles on it. It's all about that people want to keep gas stoves and that there should be maybe regulations on the venting requirements or something. Like, nobody's talking in the mainstream legacy press about, well, they're not allowed to ban gas stoves. Like, that's really should be the primary point. But even in this fact check, they never get into that.
Well, again, when we're talking about this as a constitutional question, this Karine Jean-Pierre is a House press secretary, right? And just said in that quote that they are an independent agency, right? Wait a second. If they're independent, who's their boss? You're telling me that the president isn't their boss right now. In that press statement, she says basically the president is not their boss.
No, they're independent.
They're totally independent.
As if they're not part of the executive agency.
But if that's true, if they are truly independent, then what's their authority by the Constitution? Because once again, the whole question is, The Constitution doesn't mention the Consumer Product Safety Commission or any of these other agencies. And the theory has been that the legislature, in creating these agencies, is giving authority to the executive branch to implement certain laws, right? They're creating a law that says there shall be a Consumer Product Safety Commission. It needs to do certain things. And they're saying, here you go, executive branch. Executive branch now has the power to enforce laws. And how do we want you to enforce this law? We want you to create this agency. We want it to do certain things. So the whole legal fiction that creates the administrative state is that it's still within the three branches of government, that it's still within the Constitution, because the legislature is making a law or giving a direction, and the executive branch is simply enforcing that law. Mm-hmm. But if they're independent, then they're not part of and they're saying they're not part of us. They're not part of the executive branch. And of course, they're certainly not part of the legislative branch anymore, because the whole point was that the legislative branch gave away some of their powers to be handled by this agency. If they're independent, they're unconstitutional. That's like kind of.
So the actual and the commissioner of the agency said that. Like I guess he actually thinks that. He doesn't have
he's like,
to
I'm
ask.
not beholden to the president. He can't fire me.
He probably can't.
I took administrative law in law school, and it was really fun. My my administrative law professor in law school kept saying, "Where in the Constitution does it say they can do this?" And we were all like, "It's not in there." And he's like, "So how is this constitutional?" And we're like, "It's not." That's kind of the standard answer every day.
The same thing every day comes up.
Yeah, because like every day it would come up. But so the big difference is that there are people who serve at the will and pleasure of the president, and there's people who can only be fired for cause, and there's people who cannot be fired, but it would have to be impeached, basically, that work in this administrative state. Because again, they didn't want the president to just become an absolute dictator when they created some of these agencies. But the question is can they do that? Can the legislature create a fourth branch of government?
Well, as a practical matter, the answer is obviously yes, because they did.
As a practical matter, yes, they have done it.
They have done it, but it's not legal, right? It's not constitutional. Right. It's not legal.
But it doesn't strike me as very constitutional. So there's a couple different doctrines or ideas, right? Legal ideas that come up when this comes up. One is the non-delegation doctrine, the idea that the legislature can't use its power to abdicate its responsibility. It has responsibilities under the Constitution. Those responsibilities are affirmed by every person who goes to be part of the House or the Senate, right? Every legislator takes an oath to uphold the Constitution, which means they cannot abdicate their responsibility by giving it to somebody else. For example, this applies when people think about creating administrative guidelines, the CFRs. The Code of Federal Regulations is this body of law not created by Congress. It's created by these agencies. Basically, these agencies have legislative powers, and they're creating laws, even though they're not elected officials, right? And so the theory goes, sorry, it doesn't work that way. We've given all of the authority to legislate laws to Congress, to the House and the Senate, right? We've given that to these legislators. And they can't just give away that power to an unelected agency to do that. So that's called the non-delegation doctrine. Now it's generally been ignored. This doctrine. The Supreme Court has just not paid attention to it in a long time. But I think we might be getting to the point where it might come back. Just a few years ago, the Grundy decision, it was called, was about the sex offender registry, which once again is one of those administrative things that some people think it's a good thing, some people think it's a real waste and it's prejudicial and that it's unfair. But yeah, the sex offender registry, as hot a button as that an issue that is, let's set that aside for a moment and say, yeah, but who administers this, right? It's an administrative law type of thing, this sex offender registry. And so what happens when it's being handled in a way that seems unconstitutional once someone wants to bring it to the Supreme Court, right? So he brings it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court held on plurality 4-4. But no, was it 5-3? Anyway, no, it was 4-3, I think, because we had a recusal. But they held on plurality that they were not going to visit the non-delegation doctrine, but the dissents all said, this is a non-delegation doctrine problem. You cannot create a sex offender registry because Congress just cannot give this kind of lawmaking authority that changes people's lives, that affects people's lives permanently, to an unelected fourth branch of government. And Samuel Alito actually wrote in his concurrence with the majority that if there was one more justice on his side, and Kavanaugh was recused, he said, if there's even one more justice on my side who could have voted, I would vote that the non-delegation doctrine applies. So we were really, really, really close to having the non-delegation doctrine reaffirmed, even though it hasn't been used in almost 100 years or something, to throw out an administrative agency.
But it didn't fly. We're close.
By the skin of its teeth, it didn't happen. But I'm telling you, we've got a new majority on the Supreme Court. It is clearly a conservative majority in the Supreme Court, and this has been a pet peeve, a favorite idea for law professors and things like that for ever since it was first articulated. And you've got a bunch of justices now that seem to be in favor of it. I mean, I learned this in law school, even though the Supreme Court hasn't spoken about it in a long time, because it is a difficult constitutional question. And so it has to be debated for people to understand the law. And I think we have, as dismissive as we want to be of this idea of this non-delegation doctrine, I think it's actually supported by a majority of the Supreme Court justices now.
That the current Supreme Court justices, if something like this came up, would
reaffirm it, yeah, and throw out an administrative agency. And so right now, the administrative law, especially after this Gundy decision, I think they're all trembling in their boots, saying, do not bring any lawsuits. Avoid lawsuits at all costs. Do not let this go to the Supreme Court again, because if it does, we're going to lose.
That might be the next ludicrous one. I just picked out one other ludicrous one, and I wanted to make sure that, because I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, never been a member of any political party. So yeah, Rebel Civics doesn't harp on Democrats. So I figured I'd bring up another ridiculous, ludicrous one. Was the bump stock ban.
I read the Constitution. I don't remember the term bump stock being in the Constitution.
And the whole decision is ludicrous. I highlighted one part here. I'm just going to read it. Officials at the BATF had previously concluded bump stocks were merely a gun, accessory, or firearm part, not subject to federal regulation. Okay, just stop there. It's a piece of plastic with a spring. So yeah, I think they were correct there. But
you can just create one, right?
It's
not like banning it's going to make any difference. If you want to figure out how to make one, it's like, oh, it's a piece of plastic with a spring on it.
Spring, yeah. So what changed here? As now I don't think they went back and looked at the Constitution, but the change was the line above here. It gained national attention from the Vegas shooting. He had a bump stock. Whether he used it a lot or whether it made a difference is not that clear, but he did have one. And President Trump called on the Justice Department to outlaw the devices. So the justice officials told CNN they took a fresh look, quote unquote, fresh look, in light of modern developments. Now, the modern developments is politics, right? That's the modern development.
The main, of course, the tragedy in Las Vegas, which, by the way, by itself was very suspicious and rather strange situation. I mean, it was a horrific tragedy, though, no matter how you look at it. It was a horrific, horrific act. But again, what can you do about it legally is a really, really hard question. How do you, and any regulation they do, could it have stopped something like that?
It's illegal to shoot 75 people from a sniper
certainly
position. Like, that's already illegal. The guy, he planned that for months and months. It's like, you can't make evil illegal. It doesn't help. Evil exists.
Right.
If he didn't have a bump stock, the guy would have figured out another way. I mean, if he was smart enough to plan that, the guy was
than it is I mean, the device helps you with this firing style, but the idea is you're basically shaking the gun back and forth to
But
allow you to continuously pull that trigger quickly. It diminishes accuracy, but then they call that a bump, and then because you're basically literally just going bump, 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 and then the little spring system just helps you kind of hold it steady while you do this. But it's almost more of an idea they're trying to ban, frankly.
It's kind of a fun thing, I guess, like to use it. It almost falls in the toy category for
Once again, it is a low accuracy, high
rate of fire
thing to do. But
and the reason the thing exists is the 1934 Firearms Act and the way it's enforced, because automatic weapons are not. It's not constitutional for them to ban automatic weapons either. So the bump stops would not even exist. Likely would not even exist if they hadn't banned automatic weapons. So they're getting something close to, in my opinion, I would say. So the reason this I tied in what you said so earlier when we were talking about the gas stove ban, that they don't want something to bring up the Grundy decision. They don't even want to get to that. So this one, here's the text of it. I have the link. I'll put this stuff will all show up in the show notes. This is the BATF. Like, Congress didn't do this. It wasn't the president. The Department of Justice, which is Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, is an agency in there.
Which is
they
kind of
clarified.
Too, I want to point out, because what an interesting pairing. Alcohol, tobacco, firearms, explosives. What do all these things have in common? Almost nothing, right? It's very, very strange that they all ended up in one place. And it's really part of that history of administrative law. The existence of the ATF is almost certainly completely unconstitutional. And it's this cobbling of weird political issues into one, let's do whatever we want agency that was created because, they couldn't make it food and drug for alcohol and tobacco because they didn't want to admit that they were drugs, and they didn't want to admit that they were food. So they had to create a new agency so that they could give unique regulations for this particular type of food and this particular type of drug.
Alcohol is a drug. Tobacco,
is a drug.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, why do they regulate tobacco with firearms? That's a good point.
Right? What do these things have in common? Almost nothing. What they have in common is political will at a particular time to create a certain amount of regulation in our lives. Even though there's no authority under the Constitution for them to do so. This is why we have what's called the enumerated powers in the Constitution. Specific things the federal government is supposed to do, and other things it's not supposed to do, right? And nowhere in there did we give them authority to do this. And so they're taking that authority by creating, whenever there's political will or allowance to do so, whenever the flag wavers are saying, you got to save us from this problem, help us out, government, without any real thought for which part of government actually has any authority to help them with that thing. What do? They create a new agency because the people demand action. And then they'll just go ahead and give this blank check to a new agency, which then for the next 100 or more years can do whatever it wants with no oversight, no accountability.
And it's clear from the Constitution that the ATFE, BATFE, or ATF, or BATF, whatever you want to call it.
I usually just say ATF because it's shorter.
ATF, the ATF is unconstitutional. Like, the whole thing is unconstitutional. There's nothing in Article 1. This is for people who don't understand what's behind that. There's nothing in Article 1 that authorizes Congress to create or fund an agency. And the Second Amendment, as far as the firearms goes, it specifically reminds them that they're not allowed to do it. So it's illegal for two different reasons.
Sure.
I'd have to read one quote. Of course, it's the common quip, it should be a store. Somebody said, should be the name of a store. Oh, and by the way, it was Crystal G said that at PorkFest it was a store. So
at PorkFest there was the ATF store that sold alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
They sold alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and that ammunition. I don't remember if they had explosives. They had tobacco.
Ammunition has little explosives in it.
Yes, and I bought a glass of wine when I was walking around from the ATF. With a gold back.
Did you pay them in gold backs though?
I paid in a gold back, and I had I gave them a 1, which was rough. Everybody's using it as $4 US dollars equivalent then. It's about the same now, I guess.
It is about the same now.
About the same. So it was $4.
$3.99 today.
And it wasn't
very
particular
exact.
$3.99. It wasn't particularly expensive wine that he had. He had
Sure.
he had a box, I think. So he said, "Well, that's too much." And I said, "Well, I don't have anything smaller than a one goldback. I didn't have any fiat money with me. All I have was my goldbacks." And he said, "Oh, well, I'll give you change, you know." So the change was one 9mm shell and 2 cigarettes. That was the change he gave me. And I kept them both. I brought them back to Florida because I thought it was hilarious. That was the change for a goldback in it. They got a glass of wine for one goldback. The change was a 9mm. And then I got home. When I got back, it was nighttime, and I got back. I realized it was a steel case 9mm. So I've never actually stuck it in the gun, but I kept it just for fun. I saw he could have given me a decent round, you know. But anyway. So he was a little cheap on that, and I don't smoke, so there was a guy that smoked near us, so I gave him the cigarette. Anyway, this agency's clearly unconstitutional. And what is as you brought up earlier, I want to talk about, like, the Supreme Court actually by default upheld this. What they did is they wouldn't hear it, which is it went through lower court. So essentially, the federal court system upheld the bump stock ban. So the courts, obviously, they're federal employees working for the federal government. So if a state or people don't like what the federal government is doing as far as a 3-letter agency, you can't go to the federal government and complain. That doesn't work. And taking it to the Supreme Court, that's what that is. You're going to the federal government to tell the federal government you don't think they should be doing what the federal government does. And the problem is that the federal government often sides with the federal government. That's basically how I look at the Supreme Court.
This is one of the biggest problems that I think we have in policing in general right now, is that if you ask the police to investigate police misconduct, they shockingly never seem to find it. And that's a problem. We should be able to appeal to somebody for justice if we're not getting justice from the people who are supposed to enforce the law. And this is why they're supposed to be independent, right? 3 branches of government are supposed to be independent so they can have checks and balances, right? Basic checks and balances idea is that the Supreme Court will have no deference whatsoever to the other branches of government. They'll have no reason to have any deference. That's why they have things like lifetime appointments, for example. This came up the other day. My daughter was like, why give them lifetime appointments? I mean, maybe they have really old-fashioned ideas that'll last for a long time on the court.
And they don't have lifetime appointments. They have an appointment while they have good behavior. It doesn't say lifetime.
Well, I guess that's true. It's very hard to impeach one when it comes to bad behavior. Who gets to define that, right? But
essentially impossible. This is from memory, but there was I recall there was one impeachment, but it didn't. He didn't get removed.
Actually remove.
So no one has ever been removed for bad behavior.
Right. So
they get removed because they die. That's
right. But there's a reason for that, why they can serve so long as they have good behavior, which is we don't want them to be beholden to the administrative state or the executive branch or the legislature. We don't want them to be beholden to anyone. They can't have an independent political view if they're worried about their next term, if they're worried about re-election, if they're worried about pleasing the political powers that be. They can't have independent thought that looks only at what is right. And so we kind of need that independence in the judiciary, right? We need that kind of independence. But de facto, they don't seem to have that. Again, one of my pet peeves is the Chevron doctrine. The Supreme Court created what's called the Chevron doctrine to say that they will give deference to administrative agencies, give a deference to administrative laws, the definitions, the interpretations even that the administrative state comes up with. They get first deference unless it is clearly and overwhelmingly wrong, unconstitutional, something like that, that's in an overwhelming way. Say an administrative agency decides that they are going to ban Congress and prevent Congress from meeting, and they're going to use the funds they receive from Congress to go into Congress and drive them out at the point of a sword. then the Supreme Court would say, well, we can't uphold this action. We can't give deference to this as a legal action. But basically, almost anything shy of that, the Chevron doctrine says, just let them do whatever they want. We're going to give deference to them. We're going to assume that they're right, because we don't want to second guess the administrative experts.
They're the quote unquote experts. Fauci, right, for example. Just to throw one out. I wasn't going to get into that. So anyway, the Supreme Court did hear in this, right, exactly what you said about the Grundy, that they didn't hear it. And Neil Gorsuch, who is a Trump employee, he's supposedly conservative, but he's still a big government guy. He said the court was correct not to intervene. So the lower court said that it was fine. Mm-hmm. Bump stocks are an automatic weapon. So they defined a piece of plastic in a spring as an automatic weapon. That's what they did. So you can't have this thing because it's classified as a machine gun. Anyway, just close that part out. Just all federal firearm restrictions are unconstitutional. Every one of them, from the 1934 Firearms Act all the way through to the bump stock executive order, which wasn't even Congress. That was right. It's an agency regulation.
Well, and this is why the president is so much more of a king, because all of these administrative orders, all of these executive orders usually affect some administrative agency. And then those administrative agencies actually affect our lives. Mm-hmm. In fact, when you think about it, which parts of government actually affect you? So much of what government does doesn't affect most of us most of the time.
We try our best.
Directly affect us. The agencies affect us more than any other branch of government. Whatever some Maryland senator's up to doesn't really directly affect me most of the time. But the administrative agencies and their decisions affect many aspects of my life.
Yeah, the agencies affected me right before the show. I went to the bathroom, and they affect the agencies define how much water my toilet is allowed to use when I flush it. Like it affects us every day.
Right.
Like you can't go by. You remember the old toilets? I bought a house that was built in 1959. Had one of them 5-gallon per flush toilets. Like there's nothing you could throw a baby in that probably if you needed to. I mean, that thing.
After having plumbing problems.
I'm joking.
After having plumbing problems once, I remember joking. I was like, "We're gonna fix this, and I'm gonna get a new toilet. I want a toilet that I can drop a brick into the toilet and flush it, and it will go down, and it will not get stuck on any of the pipes between me and the city."
But I use that as an example because, it sounds funny, but I'm not being facetious. They do define how much water our toilets are allowed to use. They define, the agencies just run amok, like they do affect our lives. There was I forget who did it. Somebody on Twitter yesterday said, what is the last action of the federal government that affected you positively? What would you? I'll tell you. I'm curious what your answer would be, and I'll tell you mine after you tell me yours.
Real quick, my brother is a environmental scientist, and he tries to prevent any and regulate any radioactive waste. His job is to make sure that radioactive waste isn't getting out in the public. And I have a little bit mixed feelings about some of these, because you're asking me positively. Well, it's so easy to think of all the negative examples, right? Positively, though, what's affecting me positively? Well, I actually am really grateful for the EPA sometimes when it comes to some of these environmental regulations that kind of have saved me from some really gross pollution. I mean, I used to live in Cleveland, okay? Like when the Cuyahoga River caught fire, that made people wake up to the fact that if a river's on fire, there's a lot of pollution.
But this is the common, it's a fallacy. Like, who would build the roads? Because Utah would have an EPA that would work on
contained radioactive waste,
and they would probably do a better job. It's likely, in my opinion, that a state-run EPA would do a better job in Utah of watching radiation, and your brother would work for that one. That's who your brother would work for,
and then it would be constitutional because the states are allowed to organize themselves.
It falls into but who will build my roads? like the way Tom Woods put it. He said, okay, there's a Walmart here and there's a whole bunch of people over here and there's no government to build the roads. And everybody just stands there like, oh no, what will we do?
Right? Walmart will build a road.
Walmart would build the road, yeah, or the people that needed to go to Walmart. I often, when roads come up, I say, the guys got to the Philadelphia to write the Constitution without the federal government highway, right? Like, how do you think they got there?
Yet, so
they took a road
there somehow.
They took a road,
right,
from New Hampshire and South Carolina.
This does remind me of one other problem though with corporatism. With you bringing up Walmart, I'm like, well, Walmart would build the road, right? But here's one of the biggest dangers of the corporatism that we have. These corporations have gotten so big that they are self-destructively even sometimes unaware of their own needs or the needs of their customers or the needs of their employees sometimes, that they will literally implode and take down entire communities with them rather than do what would make sense under market forces sometimes, because they're so big and unwieldy bureaucracies. Sometimes they don't even know what's good for them.
In most cases, I think, perhaps all cases, a company like Walmart would not exist without this federal bureaucracy set up, because they would be so paralyzed.
They might not build the road; they would just die.
Well, or Walmart would be a distribution network or something. They might there would be some company like them. There would probably, like, Amazon's a great idea. There probably would be something like Amazon, but it'd be tied in with a million little businesses. That's that's what would happen in a voluntarist, in a less government environment. All right, I have another one I was going to bring up. This is a fun one. What do you think about Christopher Wray? Let's talk about the FBI for like 3 minutes.
Another FBI.
Unconstitutional police force.
J. Edgar Hoover blackmailed people. That's why the FBI exists.
That's how it was formed. It was created. And the FBI, here's my quip I use, which I've seen other people use, but the FBI exists to counter the threat posed by the existence of the FBI. So FBI Director Christopher Wray gave a talk at the World Economic Forum. What's up with that?
Right? What does this have to do with economics?
Well, with the World Economic Forum, that's this move to the one big government, right? This is the world government thing. One world socialist government. One world
cybersecurity big brother government.
And the FBI, the director of the FBI, like, you'd think he's busy. I thought there's all these threats. But yeah, he went to the world. I was astounded at this. Like, no, he's not allowed to do that. That's not I mean, the whole agency is unconstitutional. There's no constitutional authorization for a police force that operates within the states.
I'm especially amused by looking at the history of J. Edgar Hoover. What an interesting guy in history. And yeah, that's why I would say my summary of the FBI is it only exists because J. Edgar Hoover wanted power and money, and he blackmailed public officials to get it, and they gave it to him because he had dirt on all of them.
He had dirt on all of them. Yes. So anyway, I thought this was amusing. And you see the FBI, all this stuff came out with the Governor Whitman kidnap plot that half the people were informants and FBI agents, like, creating their own crime.
Right. It's amazing how often the CIA will be arrested by the FBI, or
they don't know.
Or the FBI won't be talking to other FBI agents. They'll all start shooting at each other because, like, they're the bad guys, and it's like, no, we were just pretending.
You say, who are these guys? It turns out the CIA and the FBI.
Yeah.
And who the FBI, shouldn't leave the country. Like, the FBI doesn't have a job where he has to actually leave the country. Anyway, there's the FBI. We won't spend no time on that. All right, so this is another one I was going to go through here. Let's talk a little more about the agencies. And there's so many of them. This is from Wikipedia. Now, why Wikipedia listed Congress and the judiciary and the executive office? So, okay, 1, 2, and 3, they're okay. They're not actually agencies. I don't know why Wikipedia. They think everything can be done.
Well, because they're treating them like they're agencies, because again, agencies are like another branch of government. right?
To them, it's all one thing, I guess.
I think, well, that's why they have them as 1, 2, and 3. Maybe the 3 branches of government, and then the 4th branch of government becomes everything else.
No, there's their list of agencies.
Now, I
They
do.
have,
Oh my gosh, how
they
long
have
is this going to go?
25. They have 25. So yeah, we can't talk about each one. But what I was thinking is, I was just going to blast through this list. Do I have it big enough to read? Yeah, you
Yeah, I
can
can
see it,
read
right?
it.
Okay, I can make it a little bigger. I was going to blast through this list and just say, all right, constitutional, yes or no.
All
Department
right,
of Agriculture, number 4.
not constitutional as
No,
far as I
okay.
know.
Okay, so we don't have to go through 4.1 through 4.9.
No.
They're all unconstitutional. Department of Commerce, number 5.
Regulations between interstate commerce is one of the things that's mentioned in the Constitution. Interstate commerce is, but how do they do it? A department? I don't think they're allowed to have a department. So no, unconstitutional.
No. Okay, I agree. And the regulators want to point out, because this is a civics show, that when they said regulate in the Constitution, in the Commerce Clause, what they were talking about is make trade regular between the states. That
Right.
is that
They can
the
make rules.
The federal government is allowed to tell states you can't have a tariff on products imported from another state. That's
Yep.
what they meant. That's what they mean by regulate. They mean regular, not the way we use regulation today. All right,
Yep.
little aside for civics lesson. Number 6, Department of Defense.
You'd want to say yes, because we one of the specific things the federal government is tasked with is the common defense, right? Coordinating the common defense. However, if you remember one of my last visits, I believe that the Second Amendment was meant to prevent the existence of standing armies. In other words, a permanent military force. The Second Amendment talks about the well-regulated militia and a free state. And clearly, from the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, they felt that any standing military would violate the ability for it to be a free state. That's the difference between a free state, by the way, and a not so free state, is one has a standing army and the other one does not.
So you could argue, the common argument is that it is in the interest of national defense, but the founders never wanted a standing army. They thought
Correct.
that the states had armies. Each state
So having
has
a
an army,
Secretary of
and they
War,
have.
I think that it's perfectly fine for the President of the United States to hire a guy and say, look, I need a specialist. You're the Secretary of War. Help me coordinate this stuff, and have an employee. I mean, he's allowed to have an employee.
And he's a consultant if Congress does declare war, or if the U.S. gets invaded and he has to react immediately before they can declare war. He's got a consultant because he becomes commander in chief of the state militias of the people.
Right.
So
that he can coordinate that common defense. So yeah, there can be a secretary, but a Department of Defense?
Secretary. And the secretary could have staff, but not
Sure.
the Pentagon. Not the whole
Right.
Pentagon.
And then
not
and
a
no
trillion.
armies. So I guess I'd say that's 99% unconstitutional instead of just going with a full 100% no.
So you don't need a. Okay, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I won't go against that, but I think there's a lot of flag waivers will say that no, you have to have that. But no, I agree with the standing army part. So that one is arguable both ways, I'll say. I think a lot of people would go the other way. Okay, next. This one's a little easier, number 7.
Department of Education, unconstitutional. There's just there's no basis to even make an argument here. I have no idea. Besides them saying, look, we did it, no one's stopping us, and the federal and the judiciary is giving us deference. That's what they're doing, but there's no basis. I can't imagine a basis for that.
To run any education program within the states for citizens, like, no, that's clearly unscot. And as an aside, like, for people who are interested in actually fixing their local government run schools, getting on the Board of Education and going to meetings, you're just quibbling around the problem. You're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic kind of thing. You got to get rid of the U.S. Department of Education before you can fix your local school. If they're funding your local school, I don't think you can fix it. So,
right. Again, this is about those enumerated powers, and one of the enumerated powers is not organizing educational goals for the whole country or something. There's no
Title IX program and providing student loans and and regulating what degrees do and all of this. So all these 7.1 through 7.7, all of them are unconstitutional. And is like what you brought up with the Department of Defense, I can think of one possibility that you could have some guy or some small group, which is education of people in the military. So I would say, and that could be part of the military, that the federal government could fund, Congress could constitutionally fund education programs related to duties of military.
Except those militaries, of course, would be state militias, and the education would have to be about coordinating their
bingo.
effort.
Okay, you got me. Okay, good.
So
You straighten me out. You straighten me out on 7. Okay, so all of 7 is done.
Pretty much, yeah. Sorry.
Good. No, all of it. Yeah. No worries. Okay, number 8, United States Department of Energy.
Yeah, the word, I don't think energy appears in the Constitution. The word even. So no, I'm just going to go with, I'm not sure what argument you would make. I can think of practical reasons why we should cooperate on energy issues, but shouldn't that be the states and then cooperation between the states?
States can make agreements between each other. And, the last winter we had, everybody found out about Texas. Texas has its own independent grid.
It does, and they made a few, and they regulate their own energy grid. And the problem is, they did make some poor choices that were highlighted as the lack of quality. I mean, especially bizarre to me is the idea that a wind turbine could freeze up. There are literally wind turbine power arrays where they've got a whole bunch of wind turbines in Antarctica. Okay.
Sure. You can design a wind turbine.
It's very easy to winterize these babies, but somebody at the Department of Energy of Texas, which should be allowed, decided to cut corners and made some poor choices.
And they relied on wind. Yeah, I've heard they are fixing that, but it's not an immediate thing. They have to make some changes. But conceptually, the state having an independent energy grid is a good idea. I wish my state had that. It will help when Texas leaves the union. That they can. That makes that easier. Okay, number 9, the Department of Health and Human Services.
Humans are referred to in the Constitution, at least indirectly. In terms of the people.
The term is the people.
Right, and health could be a form of general welfare, I suppose, but. No, this one's a stretch. I don't think so. I don't think that's constitutional. And now, oddly enough, Romney Care in Massachusetts, when they created, I think that's allowed because it's Massachusetts. On a state level, you can have a health department. By
definition, the 9th and 10th Amendments remind us of that. But it's not a
but I don't see
function.
That's not a federal issue.
It's not a function delegated. Health and Human Services, or what they do, everything that agency does, is not a delegated authority of the federal government. Therefore, as the 10th Amendment says, it's either in the hands of the states or the people.
Yep.
As in not a function of any government at all. Number 10, United States Department of Homeland Security.
Oh, this one is the worst of all. Absolutely no. Let's remember when this was created. This was created in response to 9/11.
Yes.
And it comes with the Patriot Act, and it comes with mass surveillance, illegal surveillance by the NSA against all Americans. It comes with, what a mess. And don't forget, 10.2 there on your list. 10.2 says component agencies. This is we're not just about one agency here. We're talking about a family of agencies that goes on and on and on and on. It is unbelievable how many agencies are under this one agency.
Okay, I can probably just rattle them off. I'm not even going to go in them all. The flood insurance program, I happen to live in Florida. This one's a disaster for Florida because people build huge mansions in places that no sane person would do so.
And they've removed any market incentive for any actuary or insurance company to actually have any market forces apply to this behavior, right? So there's no motive, literally no motive to even be responsible.
So you get away from that, and we have.
Or even mitigate damage.
I live several miles inland in a 2-story concrete condo that's built like a fort. Concrete block built in 1970 with poured concrete gaps. Like this thing ain't going anywhere. It's like I've been here several times in hurricanes. It's like you're inside a fort. We go outside, we shut the metal shutters. We
And
can
you're
live
good.
inside. We could live inside for extended period of time with nothing. Anyway, all these other things here: Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency. Look at all these things. Stakeholder Engagement Division.
And a lot of this, of course, is spying on you. It's spying on me. It's spying on all of us right now. A lot of this stuff is literally guns pointed in at Americans, even though we talk about this being protecting us from terrorism. For example, under here, one of these you're going to find is the TSA, which is my favorite one to hate on. I absolutely hate the TSA.
Here it is right here, the TSA.
I literally think it is one of the worst tragedies in American history that we created the TSA. And people say, oh, well, they protect us. No, they don't. The TSA kills more people than the terrorists. Okay, the TSA harasses every single person who attempts to do so much as exercise the most basic human right to travel. Has to be harassed by the TSA.
Yes, I don't think Thomas Jefferson and James Madison think they delegated a power to a federal employee to feel your crotch before you got on a stagecoach.
Nope.
No,
and yet there they are, and they literally they cost more money than rebuilding the World Trade Center multiple times over.
That's a good one.
They take more lives than the terrorists took on 9/11 over the years. They've besides the fact, if you consider life in terms of time, they have delayed every single flight for every single American by more than an hour. Every single one.
How much is that? Lost.
How much is that? How much
lost
economic
opportunity cost?
How many billions of dollars is that?
Opportunity cost of all that.
How many millions of years of human lives, of millions of lives, does that add up to? Yeah, it's crazy to think about.
So, yep, that whole one's the Federal Air Marshal Service. Of course, that's unconstitutional because you don't need it. The Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers, I'll just point out, that's unconstitutional because federal law enforcement is unconstitutional. So you don't need to train anybody. The Coast Guard, actually, you can. There is some that can fall into the military.
It's basically a form of militia, though, that should probably fall under the states.
It should fall under the states.
By the federal. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, my like the federal government is allowed to have what do they call it? Needful buildings, forts, and armories. So you could have coastal protection for that. It would kind of fall under that, but it's a very small scale thing. Nothing like what we have now. And by the way, the Coast Guard has ships that go overseas and fight in wars,
which is also a problem. It should be guarding our coasts. It shouldn't necessarily be engaging in foreign aggression.
Okay, now here's one: Customs and Border Protection. They actually are allowed to do that, right?
They are actually, yes. The federal government is delegated the specific responsibility of dealing with our borders. However, don't forget what a big difference this has been since our founding, right? We used to have Ellis Island, which was created under these powers simply as a way to figure out who's coming and try to create some records and point people in the right direction and stuff like that. It didn't tell people they couldn't come. So
they would turn people away for being ill.
Yeah, you could turn people away for certain reasons, but those were not targeted against the person's status. They were to try to protect America from, bringing in vectors of disease, maybe. But
other than that, anybody that wanted to come, and there was no safety net per se. Something like a third to a half the people in the 1800s went back to their country. They couldn't make it, and they ended up going back.
Wow.
Because they didn't walk off and get a free Obama phone.
Yeah.
Like that isn't what happened in 1850.
Well, and I remember one of the most outrageous things to me is the way refugees are now. Talk about a totally different mindset. Refugee status now is granted to people, and we pay to bring them from all the way to the other end of the world sometimes here. We brought in this refugee from Liberia. I was volunteering with Arizona Legal Aid, and there was this refugee that had been brought from Liberia to the United States. totally illiterate, even in her own language, spoke no English at all. And they were saying, well, Arizona doesn't want to pay for her benefits. And I'm like, sometimes you create the mess, you got to deal with the mess you created. We literally took this person from her country, put her in Tucson, and now we don't want to take care of her. Like, literally, we should at least put her back where she might have a chance to figure out her own environment. But instead, we have literally uprooted her into a totally foreign environment. What are we going to do with her? Right?
You've taken responsibility for her.
You've taken responsibility for her. She's now basically a ward of the state. She was disabled too, by the way.
So that whole thing's a mess. And you could say, all right, the federal government does have the authority to, what's called, establish a uniform rule of naturalization. So they can establish a policy. You do need borders, like I believe in proper property, therefore I believe in borders. But there's so many enticements to come in. As Stefan Molyneux put it, how big of a wall do you need around your property if you scatter diamonds all over your front lawn? It's a good
right. You need a bigger
good way to question. Daniel Miller yesterday on Twitter pointed out that Texas needs to handle the immigration problem in Texas. Like, the federal government is not doing it. It's a huge problem. And a stat he used just to as a note of the scope, more people invade Texas through the Mexico border every month than went up onto the beaches in Normandy.
Right.
And that's an invasion.
Which seems like a lot, which is pretty intimidating when you put it in those terms, right? Here's the thing, too, though, that brings back, we inherit the problems that our ancestors left for us. This is the same problem with the national debt, right? We're leaving problems for future generations. Past generations have left us a pile of problems, and one of them is that dumb border. Oh, my gosh. All the way back to Baden-Powell, he was arguing you cannot, especially in the western half of this continent, you cannot have a border that cuts a watershed in half or crosses a river or goes along a river. To do so is to invite permanent conflict because of water rights, which is literally the most valuable resource in the Western United States. More money has been paid for water rights in the western part of the United States than has been paid for all the gold that has ever been mined in the gold rush, in all the gold mining sense. Literally, water is more valuable than gold out here. And so the idea that they made the border a river, literally the biggest river there, the Rio Grande, is the border of our countries between the United States and Mexico, is to invite permanent, constant conflict, no matter what. Because everyone on both sides of that river depends every single day for their survival on that river. And who does it belong to? Well, it sort of belongs to both of us. Which means we're gonna have to fight over it constantly. And we can never build a wall. You know, like, this is one of the reasons why I laughed. I laughed so hard. I mean, sorry to the Trump supporters, but I laughed so hard when Trump said we're going to build a wall. Because I was like, where? In Texas, at least, where? You're going to build it down the middle of the river? Well, what happens if the water starts flowing slightly more on one side of that wall that's down the middle of the river? Well, then, bam, you've got a war on your hands, right? This is our water. We have to survive.
Yeah, they can't. He forgot about the river.
Right? It's like, you can't do that. It's impossible.
Yeah. And it's called Rio Grande. Like, it's a large river. That's why they named it that. Like, you got to worry about that. Okay, let me get back to this list here. We'll try to buzz through them. There's so many. No.
Just so many tangents to go down.
There's only a couple more, I think. Oh, I have to back out of this. Right?
No, this is just the Department of Homeland Security's subsidiary agencies. And they're not the only ones with subsidiary agencies.
Okay. Oh, I think I have to go back, right?
Yep.
I went into this. Okay.
And the next
Homeland
one
Security,
is
11. Housing and urban development.
Which also, as I want you to point out, 11.3 has subsidiary agencies, even more agencies. But no, we don't need to get into that. Housing and urban development, again, not a federal issue. No.
Department of the Interior, by definition, that's the states.
It's the states. The Interior is the states.
States are where the Department of Interior is by definition unconstitutional.
It only deals with. It's the interstate commerce regulation stuff that goes on, but again, that's supposed to be not an agency. It's supposed to be making uniform rules in Congress. So,
you see, here's all the stuff they do.
Yeah.
Indian affairs,
Indian affairs
police.
actually
The
is something delegated.
They're a
That
separate
has to be
nation.
done according to the Constitution.
The Indian police are a separate nation. I know the reservations in Florida, they have their own police. In fact, be careful. I just
Well,
spent
of course
3
they
weeks
do,
in
yes, but
Montana. They have their own police
the
too.
Bureau of Indian Affairs has their own policing agency. The police is the Bureau of Indian Affairs in its rules.
Okay. BLM, that's part of it. Bureau of Land Management.
And there's the one that everyone loves to hate, especially in the West. So it's kind of funny. People say BLM out east, and you guys probably think Black Lives Matter. You say BLM anywhere in the West, and people go, "Oh yeah, the Bureau of Land Management," and then then only secondarily, "Oh, wait a second, did you mean Black Lives Matter?" It is a well-known agency here because, for example, in Utah, Utah only owns about 80% of Utah. I mean, no, the BLM owns about 80% of Utah. Utah only owns about 20% of Utah.
Utah is one of the smallest, and California is up there too, 50% or something.
Nevada's the absolute worst. Nevada, the BLM owns over 90% of Nevada.
Yeah, so that does not fall into the 10 square miles and needful forts and buildings.
Right. So so if you're in Nevada, who matters more to you, your daily life, if you live in Nevada? The state of Nevada government or the federal government? It's the federal government through the Bureau of Land Management is literally the largest effect on your daily life than anything else, because the Bureau of Land Management literally owns the land you walk on, you sleep on, where your cows graze, where you're going to go. It's owned by the BLM.
The National Park Service.
Yep.
Even though the parks are nice, like those should be done by the states. Fish and Wildlife Service. No, they don't have authority over fish.
Right. Again, these are more like they should have been state issues according to the Constitution. Yeah,
they are state
but
issues.
the Indian affairs are a federal issue.
Okay.
Specifically and only a federal issue, and that is constitutional.
All right. The Department of Justice, they are allowed to have some legal justice, right?
Well,
it would be a small agency.
It should be, this should basically be the president's lawyer. But so yes, they can have some of this, but again, it's really outgrown.
Is all this?
No. Oh my gosh, it's outgrown any idea.
This is the list
for sure.
This is the list. We can't possibly read all this. So anyway, you just back up because you said that it should be the lawyer. The president can have a lawyer.
This is reminding me of one other thing I want to bring up. I know we're pushing our hour now.
We're past our hour. We'll keep going, and then I have one other thing I was going to bring up.
But I want to bring up
close out. Go ahead.
Justice right now. One of the biggest things is 3 branches of government. I was saying, right? We've got the legislative, the executive, the judiciary. A lot of people do not realize that there are unconstitutional, what they're called Article I courts, the executive branch courts. In other words, this administrative state, this 4th branch of government, has its own court system with its own judges, its own laws. So it didn't just create through the CFRs, for example. It doesn't just legislate. It also has its own form of the judiciary, these Article I courts. And they actually handle a huge amount of law in the United States.
Wow. Is that where the FISA court falls under?
Yeah.
Version.
Yep. And
so
all those things.
Yeah, all those are not part of the federal courts that are authorized. The Congress can.
And these judges, these administrative law judges, that serve in these courts also don't have the same protections as an actual judicial court. They can be political, essentially.
No.
They can technically, they're more likely to be biased according to these original checks and balances rules.
Even more biased.
Yeah, considerably more.
And they're allowed to be.
Now, that's not to say that there aren't a lot of good men and women who are doing their best in these agencies, right? Of course there are. But they are beholden. Their jobs are on the line as to whether or not they rule in a way that the agency wants it ruled. Essentially, their jobs end up being on the line. So we would be insane not to recognize that does have an influence.
Okay, I'm going to blast through the rest. Just give me a yes or no. Department of Labor.
No.
Department of State.
80% unconstitutional. There's a couple of things in there. We do have diplomatic things. We have to do certain writs. We have to have certain relationships. So yeah, a lot of that, it would be constitutional. But some of the stuff they do, then violates our rights under these other things like the CIA, right? So I would say
CIA, yeah. So
yeah. So
yeah, I
I'm going
agree.
to go with 80% unconstitutional. But
80%
there are
is a
parts of it
wag.
that are. So sorry, that can't be yes or no. That one's a mixed bag.
Well, it's a yes that it is okay to have a Department of State, or at least, I mean,
There's
you can
just
have
a lot of things they're
ambassadors.
doing that
You have
go outside the
ambassadors.
scope of the enumerated powers.
Yes,
Yeah.
I could think of like one example, say, of a State Department official, Victoria Nuland, who handpicked the new president of Ukraine in the 2014 coup when the CIA orchestrated the overthrow of the democratically elected government.
Right. And when that happens,
there's an example.
Once again, I don't see anywhere in the Constitution where it says we should overthrow foreign governments and set up puppets of our choosing. It's
And that
not
was
a constitutional power.
And State Department official Victoria Nuland, under direction of Joe Biden, VP Joe Biden, was in Kiev when the coup happened, handing out cookies. Okay, Department of Transportation. I'm not actually joking. She was handing out cookies.
Oh my gosh.
Department of Transportation. Her and John Kerry were there when the coup happened. As the president escaped in his helicopter while CIA trained snipers were shooting at his car, which was sent out as a distraction.
Oh my gosh.
We better not get into that because you're getting an earful from me.
We're on transportation now.
16th. Thank you.
I'm going to go with yes if it's rules for transportation. No if it's a department, if it's an agency. I don't see anywhere that this can be an agency, but transportation between states, transportation across our borders, those things, yeah, the federal government is supposed to make sure that there's free movement of peoples between the states, for example, that you cannot set up a blockade in, as much as we'd like to, in Utah, set up a blockade and say no more Californians allowed. We can't do that.
Okay. All right.
So we can make rules for transportation, but the department probably unconstitutional.
Treasury. 17.
Treasury. Oh no, sorry. Have to do this tangent. This is my biggest thing.
Yes.
We can have a treasury. We can have a treasury. We can have a treasurer. We can have rules. But you know what we can't have? We can't have a fifth branch of government where we've delegated almost all of it to that fifth branch of government, which is, what's the fifth branch of government? The Federal Reserve, which is not a branch of government at all, not beholden to anybody, but the Federal Reserve System has now taken over almost every responsibility delegated to the Treasury of the United States and usurped it and is controlling it as a private company. So the people think the Federal Reserve, because of the word federal is in the name, is part of the federal government because they both use the word federal. Not so. It is a private bank that the federal government has more or less delegated huge amounts of power and authority out of government into a private institution and given them the power, totally unaccountable power, to do whatever they want.
Operating in secret.
And operating in secret, they can do whatever they want. So they can create things like these Federal Reserve notes, which means what exactly? Nothing in particular, except that we've all decided to play along with the fiction, right? They create these Federal Reserve notes. And they say this is worth $100. And yes, I can buy stuff with this right now, but only on the basis of the legal fiction. The Federal Reserve should be respected. They're literally a private bank issuing money, as we're trying to call it money, but it's not money. So maybe they're issuing credit, but they're not even really issuing credit. They are creating random stuff out of nothing, based on nothing, and subverting our entire monetary system. So that's why we're making the gold backs, right? We want to bring it back to a more constitutional form of money, which is gold or silver. Gold and silver are specifically mentioned as money and defined in the Constitution. Even what a dollar is was a known measurable quantity of silver and is mentioned specifically in the Constitution. So a Federal Reserve note is not a dollar. Specific legal and common definition when the Constitution was written, and a dollar is a specific amount of silver.
And the Federal Reserve, like what it caused here, I just popped this up. Okay, so here's what the Federal Reserve did since 1913.
So what you're telling me is this used to be worth 100 years ago, used to be worth a heck of a lot more. A little more than 100 years ago, a lot more. And now
it's asymptotically approaching zero. Right.
So I should just remember that when I carry one of these into a store, this is my $4 bill or my $2 bill, right?
It's $2. Yeah, 9. Yeah, it's worth. Is it down to 2? It's in the 2 to 4 or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's approaching 0. Okay.
That's the see.
and
That's the
and
thing
yeah,
with the Federal Reserve is that they're
and
really
gold
excited
back.
about.
Since you're there, like do a little gold back pitch.
Yeah, the gold back. The idea is to bring back constitutional money. So a gold back is made out of gold, right? So we've got 1/1000th of a troy ounce of pure 24 karat gold in each gold back. And then it's also this great thing because it's a whole monetary system, right? It's not just this one. There's a 5, a 10, a 25, a 50. The gold back is bringing back constitutional money by actually having it grounded in something of real value, which is gold, right? Gold has been money for thousands of years. My guess is it'll still be valuable in thousands of years because it's finite, it's useful, it's beautiful, it's measurable. And the main thing it does is it creates accountability. It creates accountability because you can make this out of thin air. You can't make this out of thin air.
Very good. Okay.
And that's going to create accountability. So the what was the Constitution for, right? When the founders set out in the Constitutional Convention to decide on a constitution, they were trying to create accountability. They were trying to create systems of accountability. And those systems of accountability do not work when you have a private, unaccountable agency manipulating every bit of property in this country. You said you believe in private property. What's your home worth? Well, if you denominate that in dollars, then the Federal Reserve is telling you what your home is worth, and they're telling you how they can manipulate your home, right? Creating some fifth branch of government in private hands, totally unaccountable, that can dictate every aspect of our property rights,
and it's
every
not
bit of value of anything that we measure its value.
And it's not federal, and it's not a reserve. It's not a reserve either.
Right, because they don't have any reserves. They literally make their money out of nothing.
So yeah, that's the gold back. I'll just show you. Here's
edicts.
I have to hold it near my face. So here's my gold back wallet.
Nice. You keep your gold backs in your pocket Constitution. I love it.
Yeah, that's my wallet. Yeah, I buy these by the 100 and hand them out. So I have one
a new pun level of constitutional money because it's in the Constitution. Literally.
It says gold. Oh, that's funny. It is literally in my Constitution. That's funny. That's good.
Now, you better be careful. If you give away hundreds of those, don't accidentally give away one with 100 gold backs in it or something, or that's a lot of money.
No, the one that is my wallet has a rubber band around.
Okay.
So yeah, it's actually, there's a couple there, and the ones that I give away, I put a Carter, maybe we got Rebel Civics stickers.
Nice.
I'll give you one. Are you going to Pork Fest this year?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, that's the.
In fact,
people haven't heard the Free State
Rebel Civic stickers from you last time.
Oh, maybe I did. Yeah, he sent them to me there at the campground. And for people aren't familiar, it's a yearly event by the Free State Project in New Hampshire, which is where Benjamin and I met when I bought some gold backs to go buy some wine and dinner and.
Well, and here's the real danger too. We've delegated so much power and authority to this this company, this private institution we call the Federal Reserve. We've delegated so much power and authority to them that we're in very real danger of a big step that a lot of people think is coming, which is central bank digital currency. In other words, they're going to create a digital version of the dollar, not a decentralized finance thing like actual cryptocurrencies, right? But people are going to make that as the analogy. They're just going to say, well, look, it's just cryptocurrency. No, it's exactly the opposite of cryptocurrency. A central bank digital currency would give them not only the power to monitor every transaction, but the power to control every transaction. And people say, oh, but I'm small fry. I'm just some guy. Nobody's going to try to stop my wallet. No one's going to stop my transactions. Yes, they will, because here's the thing. You don't need to hire some administrative bureaucratic person to look at that and push the buttons physically to turn on or off your transactions. We live in the time of artificial intelligence. We live in the time of algorithms that rule our lives. What's going to happen is even the Federal Reserve, even Jerome Powell, won't even know what his own company is doing, what his own bank is doing. It will be ruled by an algorithm. So when they create the central bank digital currency, the algorithm will decide or the AI will decide whether or not they approve of your purchase, and therefore whether or not your purchase is going to go through.
And and some of the credit card companies are starting to do this. They're giving people a taste of it. So from a collapsitarian point of view, I would just point out that as far as goldbacks, like, because the next step with goldbacks is really just more and more acceptance.
Right, more acceptance, more states. The more people who
using
go to goldback.com and sign up their business, the more places you can spend them, the faster it grows. We're gonna start using an alternative, right?
So maybe you should have like a separate clandestine ID, and you promote central bank digital currency, because I can't think of a better way to promote goldback use than the federal government implementing CBDC.
Right, because
like
then
goldback will explode. I'll be doing everything in goldback.
Yeah, I hope so.
and little silver coins.
I'm trying to do everything goldback now.
We had a few little silver coins too.
Nice.
Yeah, that's good. So when you get one in Florida, all right, let's finish this list. We're almost done. That was a Treasury. All right. Department of Veterans Affairs.
I guess under defense. No, that's way too far. Veterans Affairs doesn't make any sense.
And actually, healthcare for people who join for a year and aren't in the Army, haven't been in for 50 years.
And it's actually a shockingly huge agency, by the way, the Department of Veterans Affairs. Here's one of the shocking statistics. Let's say you're in favor of administrative agencies. You don't like our talk about saying no, they're unconstitutional.
They probably already left.
They probably already turned this off, right? But here's one of the shocking statistics. Someone was saying, when it comes to the Department of Veteran Affairs and just the VA health system, okay, because they offer free lifetime socialized medicine essentially to all of our veterans. They said, if you simply streamlined the VA health system and said, it's not the VA health system anymore, it's the American health system, we're going to have full socialized health care. The VA has so many bureaucrats, it's so inefficient, that if you simply said, all Americans can now get free health care, we could give every American universal health care for less money than is already spent on the VA health system. It could be cheaper if you just cut out the bureaucrats trying to decide who qualifies and who doesn't. If you got rid of just the bureaucrats and said everyone qualifies, no one will ever be asked again. All you have to do is show up and declare that you're an American citizen, and you will all get universal health care. The VA healthcare system could literally provide that to every American for less than it currently costs.
But we'd have to go to a VA hospital.
Except that they would all become VA hospitals, I suppose, under this theory. But yeah, it would literally be cheaper.
The famous speech by this was in the early 1800s. It was Congressman Davy Crockett about a federal vote in Congress to provide money to the widow of a military officer who had been in it was a long war, and that got shot down.
Because no matter how lamentable her situation, no matter how much you might want to help, there's no power under the federal. There's no power in the Constitution that gives the federal government the power to do anything about it directly.
I read part of that speech in a show a month or two ago.
Here's a much more recent example. There was the lady who was a vegetable in Florida. And Obama was a senator at the time, so this must have been under Bush. And the husband of this woman wanted to allow her to die of natural causes. There was no brain activity. She was dead anyway, as far as he was concerned. But her parents wanted her to remain on life support indefinitely. Anyways, her family, they go to Congress and they start saying, do something about this. I thought it was amusing that even Obama himself, who loved these administrative agencies apparently and didn't have much regard for the Constitution, in spite of the fact he was a constitutional law professor. So he who taught at Columbia, of all places, a fairly conservative law school. But Obama himself said, I don't think there's any authority under the Constitution that would make anything you're saying to us relevant. You're talking to the wrong person, is what he told her family when they came up from Florida. You're talking to the wrong person, because even if I desperately wanted to do something for you, I literally have no authority or jurisdiction in this matter. I can't do anything.
He said that as a senator, probably not as a president, though.
He said that as a senator. And I thought, well, yeah, exactly. That's part of the problem is that sometimes there's a problem seeking a solution. And that becomes our administrative agencies. Somebody has some complaint, some widow or some family member has some truly heart-stirring story, and they say, please help us. And we go, why are you asking us? We have literally no authority to do this. And then the little thought creeps into the minds of anybody in the administrative state. Yeah, but who's going to stop us? And then they're like, well, then let's just do it.
Okay. Then there's one here, independent agencies and government-owned corporations.
And this is where the gas stoves come in. And there are literally hundreds of these.
I'm afraid to click this.
Oh, yeah. In fact, look at the sub lists. It's like established under different types of authorities or different theories. And then the end, 19.6 of this list is just other agencies and corporations. And there's hundreds of those that are just other. We don't even know. Look, quasi-official. Literally, agency. Nobody even bothered to take out a Post-it note and a pen and say, I think I can do this because I'm the best, and like stuck it on them. They literally just did it with like no authority at all.
Yeah, for people just listening, you just laugh when you look at this, like the JFK Center for Performing Arts, the National Gallery of Art, Smithsonian, the Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars.
My favorite has got to be the National Zoological Police.
National Zoological Police. Even though the National Zoo is a quasi-federal agency. It is a nice zoo.
Sure.
Museum, the theater, the Holocaust Memorial. Look at all these. The American Institute in Taiwan.
Well, this one's especially interesting because that should be under the State Department, of course, right? That is essentially, and in Taiwan, this is a hot button issue, right? But in Taiwan, we do not have officially an embassy. Because the Chinese government will not allow us to have normalized relations. So what we have is quasi-official relations. Instead of having an embassy, we have the American Institute.
So we have American. So that's what that is. I was curious.
That's what that is.
Okay.
It's an important and wonderful institution. On this list, I suppose that was the only one that is constitutional, but it isn't constitutional for us to be calling it one thing and having it actually be another. American Institute in Taiwan is an actual embassy.
It should be a State Department.
It should be under the State Department. It is an actual embassy, but we just pretend it isn't.
We do have normal relationships.
Yeah, I mean,
I am speaking to you on a device whose processor was built by TWC Corporation, Chip Corporation. The biggest IC manufacturer in the world is in Taiwan. So, yeah, we have normal relations. My scooter was built in Taiwan. Okay. The Institute of Peace.
Almost everyone's cars have
funny.
Components made in Taiwan because they do all the computer components for almost all the cars.
If you have a processor, I can't. Yeah, it's hard to believe there's a car that doesn't have something from Taiwan in it.
Yep.
Since they make something like 55% of the integrated circuits are manufactured by TWC. I was just curious what this one was, so I clicked it. I'm still sharing, right?
You are. Yes, I can see it.
What is the National Institute for Peace? It's tasked with promoting conflict resolution and prevention worldwide. Now, do they know about this little thing going on in Ukraine? I was going to bring that one up.
I'm sure they do, and I'm sure they're talking about it a lot. But again, either that it should exist under the State Department as part of our relations with foreign powers, or it's not constitutional.
So pretty much all of these, except for ones that are like snuck in there for weird things, like the Taiwan quote unquote embassy. This whole 19, they're all okay. Joint programs. That's the joint programs with the states, I think.
Oh, I love it. And interagency agencies. There are agencies to be interagency agencies.
It's an interagency agency. I didn't look at these before the show, so sorry for people. Just have to. The Woodrow Wilson Center, International Center for Scholars. How come there's a Woodrow Wilson Center here and there was another Woodrow Wilson Center?
So let's just break this down for a second.
Okay.
If there's this many things. How many people work for the federal government?
Okay,
in these agencies, how many unconstitutional employees are there essentially?
Okay, we were talking about this, on the earlier.
Well, I found out
this. Oh, go ahead. Yeah,
go ahead. Want me to spill it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, the last estimate that I know comes from 2018, so it is certainly bigger now. But in 2018, there were 2,098,913 people in June of 2018.
The 2 million people. Yeah, out
Yep.
of 330. So
Almost 2.1. Almost 2.1.
and those are direct federal employees, right?
Yes.
Okay. So here's
Those are
another
people on the payroll who work for the administrative
2
agency.
million.
Yep.
Yeah. What's the size of
And that's been 4 years ago. 5 years ago.
pick a company like what is the equivalent company that has 2 million employees? That's a pretty big company.
Right.
So here's another thing I found.
In fact, it is the biggest company in the world by that measure.
By employees?
Yeah, there's nothing that comes close to that.
So here's another one. I'm gonna blow this up a little more. Yeah, we were talking right before the show about some of this. Oops. So this is called the true size of the government. So they got 11 million.
Mm-hmm.
So they're counting. They're counting
because
military. Because
the
that
2
2
million
million
I'm talking about are literally 2.2 estimated in 2020. It's just the dark blue at the bottom.
That's the dark blue. Then we got military. Oh, that doesn't include. They're certainly federal employees. They don't count them. 1.4. Yep. Postal. This I assume is referring to the post office, not people who went postal in 2020.
Yes, indeed. And the post office is constitutional.
0.5 million people. I think they should turn that over to FedEx.
That is pretty big.
You notice Amazon doesn't use them. Okay, contract. Now here's another one. 5 million.
Well, and this is
2.5 times.
This is your Blackwater. This is Honeywell. This is Raytheon. This is
Lockheed
those
Martin.
are just the defense ones.
It was me. I worked for many years for a defense contractor, so I was in this. I was part of the problem. And then grant.
When they give grants of money for people to do stuff on behalf of the federal government,
that's
1.8 million.
That's 1.8. It's almost as big as the total federal employees. It's another whole thing, almost the size. So yeah, this comes up to 11 million.
Wow. So here's my question: how, if we only have about 300 million people in the entire country, and 11 million of them work for the government?
This is directly for the government, right? These are directly paid full time by the government. So it's the other 90%. Now you have to divide it by how many people actually pay taxes.
Right.
They're the ones that have to pay for all this.
How do we pay for this? Because we still have to eat. We still have to be clothed. We still have to have shelter. All the necessities of life still have to be made in our economy before we do things beyond that. And this is all extra economical activity, right? These are not producers. Even a defense contractor, like you mentioned, right, isn't producing something for people to live on. It's producing something to destroy. So it's still therefore non-productive in the traditional consumer sense.
And then
how much can we afford? It makes me really wonder how much can the economy bear before we just can't bear anymore.
That's why we're 31 trillion in debt, United States, as of right now, and trillion a year, adding to that.
Right.
So yeah, it's your grandchildren are going to be paying for this.
Now, once again, that is part of the money problem. A big part of the money problem is that debt is imaginary, just like money is imaginary if it's Federal Reserve notes we're talking about. And so we're never going to pay it because we literally can't. If we were to pay off the debt, there would be no more Federal Reserve dollars in existence.
So here's an article you had brought up. Most of the government is unconstitutional. So do you want to just talk about this? Because you mentioned this is from a more left.
Oh, and it's actually, if you read the whole opinion, if your viewers want to go there and read the whole opinion, this is written by a liberal, an extreme liberal, who's lamenting and worried because he's saying, well, shoot, I love the administrative state. I want the administrative state to thrive, but it looks like the Supreme Court is going to be pointing out that it's unconstitutional. Almost all this stuff is unconstitutional.
So they call it, the New York Times, of course, they call it a conservative assault on Congress's power. So they don't have the votes. Now they say here, federal agencies have been vested with expansive authority since the dawn of the Republic. No.
I would say it really came to pass under the New Deal, that it got to be truly expansive. Teddy Roosevelt did do the National Park Service, but how much does the National Park Service really cost compared to all this other stuff? It really started with FDR.
And they say here, this is a pretty, if you want to call it, liberal thing to say. The rise of agencies like the Office of Price Administration, the Social Security Administration, and the EPA was essential to the prosecution of 2 world wars. Huh.
They certainly gave rise to
wars.
When I was reading that, I was thinking about the phrase, never let a good crisis go to waste. Whenever there is something like a world war going on, the temptation is, well, we need power to fight this war, and everyone's willing to write us a blank check because we have to fight the Nazis. And so what do? We write them a blank check, and then we indenture all future generations to extensive and onerous regulations. Because once a power is granted or assumed or taken by an administrative agency, it's never given back.
What they call a functional modern government. So what he means is a socialist, big state government control of everything. Congress has no choice but to delegate authority and discretion to federal agencies. There's no way you could get the code of federal regulation
without the bureaucracy. You could never have this level of control over everyone's lives.
So that's what they mean here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what they mean. It would be impossible for the enforcers of government to actually affect our lives to that extent unless they had the power to create these agencies. If you want your fingers in everyone's pie, you have to hire enough fingers to stick them in everybody's pie.
So in the end, he laments that most of government is unconstitutional. That's interesting. That's a quote from Justice Kagan.
Because she's concerned about this doctrine. In other words, the arguments that were brought up in the case that brought this to mind, the Gundy case, said, look, if this is true, if your argument holds, and we hold with your argument that enumerated powers in the Constitution have to be held to and things like that, then most of the government's unconstitutional. And we couldn't do that. It would be too terrible. It would just be too revolutionary for us to go back to being a free state. Like we were just going down that list, being like unconstitutional. Do you realize that if you or I were in charge of the Supreme Court for a day and just when we drew lines to these and said, this is unconstitutional, this is unconstitutional, if we could just do that, we would be putting at least 10.7 million people out of a job. Okay. Yeah. And then on top of that, more than 10 million people would be putting out of a job. We would be putting an end to almost every way that the federal government affects and interferes with people's ordinary lives. And
that's true.
That would be a radical change. At this point, it would be extremely radical. You'd have to be like some kind of person who's so into civics they're an absolute rebel about civics. To want something like that to happen, because most of government would therefore be unconstitutional. Yeah.
So I misunderstood it when I asked the question because I didn't read the whole sentence. So she said, if the law in Gundy is unconstitutional, then most of the government is unconstitutional.
Yep. And
but she's actually
the law in Gundy is unconstitutional by my theory and by yours.
So it is, and by Thomas Jefferson's and James Madison.
And by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and all the founders.
So, but as far as what the article author calls a functional modern government, they don't care. And neither does Justice Kagan.
Right.
That's why I was surprised that Kagan would say that, because I didn't think that Justice Kagan ever heard of a 3-letter agency that isn't constitutional.
Well, and basically that's what she's saying is, well, this is crazy. If we actually had to ask this difficult question, if we actually had to justify it by the Constitution, then most of the government would be unconstitutional. You wouldn't want that, would you? That would be chaos. We'd have people running around, exercising freedoms. It would be crazy. It would be crazy. It'd basically be anarchy.
It'd be true. It'd be the foundation of America.
Well, yep.
And Kagan, my favorite story to bring up about Kagan is, well, I might have mentioned to you before, but we were talking about constitutional law, like what constitutional law is at, Harvard. It's a study of Supreme Court decisions, which is all that they care about, right? We got into that once before, but Dean Kagan, her job before the Supreme Court justice, removed the last class at Harvard that was a required graduating class for a law degree at Harvard, which was one class on the U.S. Constitution. That's
Only
an
one.
option.
That's
They had one.
mind-blowing.
They had one
Mind-blowing.
until she got the dean job, and she changed it to a class in international law. And she said that
and they had none.
they have none now. Yeah, and it was
How can you
Kagan who
possibly-
did it. Her reward for that was she got appointed to the Supreme Court. Oh, we need this lady. So yeah, it was the requirement. It was a required class to get a JD.
Of course it is. How can you
It's not
possibly
now.
pretend
It's
that
not
you
now.
have a Juris Doctorate if you don't even know what the most basic law of the land is, the
It
Constitution?
is not a requirement at Harvard. And Justice Kagan is the one who removed it. She swapped it to a international law class because she said a law school graduate today needs to know international law.
They're all and then don't get me wrong, we should probably know some international law, but we should definitely need to know the
Sure.
Constitution. And it just goes to show you how little these little private clubs like the American Bar Association really matter. Because I would think that they should that something like that should have meant that they would lose their accreditation. They'd be like, sorry, you're not an accredited law school anymore. Goodbye.
We have a comment from, and we were discussing right before the show the numbers, but El Valcaro, he's often comes up with some good stuff. He says, include state and local governments, and over 50% of our economy is government spending. In 1900, it was closer to 5%.
Right. Now, 5% is probably sustainable in the sense that you always need some cushion in your economy for the things that you want, that are nice things to have, maybe, but that aren't productive in and of themselves. But with it being closer to 50%, it makes me wonder how we even survive. No wonder people struggle, right? No wonder it's hard to find housing that's affordable and all of that stuff, because really we have to lean somewhere, and we end up leaning on the working class to take lower wages so that we can afford these fancier things and things like that. Because at some point, somewhere in your economy, something has to give. Something has to add up. The numbers will add up. These are like economic laws, are like the laws of physics. They're going to be fulfilled. Sooner or later, every plane has to come down. Sooner or later, inflation will cause your currency to collapse. Sooner or later, government spending at that kind of level will cause mass starvation or civil conflict if they don't find some way to feed the people. This is why, like with the old Romans, give them bread and games. But at a certain point, you're going to run out of bread if you don't have somebody baking it and growing it.
Eventually, economics is going to catch up, just like the science catches up.
Yep. It always catches up eventually.
Yeah, we can say, well, the economics says, like, okay, you start starving, like, well, maybe you should pay attention to economics.
Yeah.
There's another good comment here. Federal Reserve and the 16th Amendment laid the economic foundation for the expansion of central planners. There's two. Both of those were key. It was going on even before that, but those two were keys. We should get rid of both of them. Throw in the 17th Amendment. I'm in.
Yeah, the Civil War amendments really are kind of the second founding. Some people say call that the second founding of the United States, because it changes the game deeply.
Or the destruction of the United States. So how the 14th Amendment is used now, maybe we have to throw that one out too. So take out the United States 14th.
Were
these United States were
one way. Yeah, and then eventually it just became the United States are.
Yeah. The United State.
Or the United States is.
State.
The United States is.
The United State is.
Yep.
There's no S on the end.
Yeah.
All right. We should probably close this out. So in summary, I'll put this back up. she didn't really mean to say it. She said it as an argument of why something else was wrong, but she's actually was correct. Most of government is unconstitutional. That's
Yep.
true. That is
And
true.
the problem is that, okay, even if you recognize that most of the government is constitutional, what do you do about it? So I guess my closing argument in almost all these cases is you build alternative infrastructures, you build alternative systems. What do you do when you're surrounded by injustice or tyranny or unconstitutional government or any of these things? You learn to opt out. You learn to not be part of the problem. And so you do stuff like use goldbacks instead of dollars. Nobody's making you use dollars. You think you're being made to because everyone's doing it.
Mhm.
You think you have to comply because everybody's doing it. In general, if we simply do not comply with tyranny, tyranny loses its power. Tyranny is a paper tiger. It's an illusion. If the people have freedom in their minds, if people have freedom in their hearts, no number of bad jackbooted thugs is going to be able to stop you from exercising your freedoms. But if everybody kowtows to that authority and they say, oh no, I couldn't possibly, I have to do whatever they tell me because they have the authority, then they do have the authority, because where's the cage? The cage is in your own mind. That's where it exists.
The people that go along are the sheeple, and the and the point of this is, alternative currencies, like you divorce yourself from the currency.
Yeah. Just stop participating. Just don't do it.
That's a big step. That's
one
a
of the
key.
things that I did was, when it came to my private law practice, is I said, I don't take payment in Federal Reserve notes. I just don't. If you want to hire me for my services, you can, but I don't accept that as a form of payment. It's just not something I do. So
that's a way to lay it out. Like, okay, encourage, make it clear, right? It's actually a good tie into next week's Rebel Civics, which is a roundtable on secession with several guests lined up. So as far as the solution goes, ultimately divorce ourselves from the fiat money system. Check. Ultimately, it looks to me like we have to divorce ourselves entirely from that whole Wikipedia list of agencies. So hashtag flex it.
Once again, it's just taking direct action. You just don't need to ask permission, right? Don't ask permission when you don't need to ask permission. Just do and exercise your human rights. Exercise your human rights. Do what you're going to do, and stop abdicating your moral agency, your moral responsibility to whatever they tell you to do.
Yep, great advice. So where's a good place to follow Goldbacks, or you, or what?
Well, definitely go to goldback.com. Any business owner, anybody who's made it this far, who's a business owner, is going to be a like-minded individual, I would think. Sign up your business to accept Goldbacks. At goldback.com, you can go to the featured businesses page and click on, how do I accept Goldbacks in my business? Give us your basic info. We're just trying to build a list of all the freedom-loving businesses that want to use sound money, real money, and have gold and silver instead of fiat paper in their business. So that's the main thing. I'd love to post you my referral link so that people can open their own Goldback denominated accounts through the United Precious Metals Association. It's not a large enough institution to be in your state, probably. We've got a branch opening in New Hampshire, in Manchester, and we've got a couple branches here in Utah. There'll be 3 places in Utah that'll have United Precious Metals Association and Serviced by Alpine Gold branches. But no matter where you are, you can still get an account. You'll just have to do some of your banking by mail that way, essentially. And it's not officially a bank. It's non-banking institution, but it offers various services. So that's something to look up. And then, when it really comes down to it, the main thing is stop selling yourself short by participating in an inflationary monetary system. At least put 5 to 10% of your savings into gold or silver. Get a tangible asset.
Okay. Yeah, send me the link. We'll put the links in the show notes on unsafespace.com. They'll show up there. it doesn't happen right away. It takes a little while for that to get processed. But yeah, send me that link and I'll add it with the links, and also all the websites we went to. That'll all be in the show notes. So
Excellent.
Thanks for joining. And yeah, as far as one solution to consider, next week's episode is the second secession roundtable. Next week we've got the leader of what's called CalExit 3. That's one of the several secession movements going on in California that is to split California into two halves, with the left liberal leaning half to spin off and form a new country called California Republic, and the eastern kind of wrapping around to the north and south, more conservative, which would actually just end up being a swing state overall, remaining in the Union as New California or California. So he's going to be on. And then secondly, we're going to have J.G. Franklin, who's he's a U.S. citizen who teaches English in Brazil, and he's part of a secession movement, which I didn't know very much about, but the three southern western states in Brazil, there's a secession movement going on within Brazil right now. So he's going to tell us about that. And bring somebody from the secession movement.
Is supposed to be a human right. If you want to be your own thing, government should let you without fighting a civil war to stop you.
You see what's behind me? Pretty much lays it all out. The Declaration of Independence explains all this, why people have the right to self-governance. So anyway, thanks for joining, Ben. That was great.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
This production was made possible through the generous support of our members. To join our community, visit unsafespace.com. Unsafe Space is an online publication for individualists interested in subverting authoritarianism and ushering in the next Enlightenment. For biting analysis and nourishing composition, or to sign up for our weekly news brief, The Abstract, visit unsafespace.com. Thanks for joining us today.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized for distribution on Apple devices. The following co-conspirators are hereby uninvited to Klaus Schwab's Winter Solstice Party. Please be advised that CBS News has paused activity on Unsafe Space while it continues to assess security. Central bank digital currency is a safe and secure way to protect you from Sam Bankman-Fried. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is misinformation. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.